Hello, I'm glad to continue our informal discussions with Dr. Askari. This is our second part of our discussions. And as I mentioned in the first part, Dr. Hossein Askari was born in Iran and received his elementary and secondary education in the United Kingdom. Then he came to the United States and he earned his bachelor, master, and PhD degrees in United States universities, and he worked in leading universities of United States. And but outside of his academic work, Dr. Askari consulted international financial institutions, and he worked with many politicians as advisors. Mostly our topics of our discussions relate to Islamic economy, Islamic way of economy, lifestyle, and Dr. Askari has a number of books written, and he created a very interesting website. So for more details, you can go to our and watch our first part of our discussions and review Dr. Askari's website. It's a very informative website. Last time, Dr. Askari has kindly asked me to call him Hossein, so I will use his first name in our discussions. Hossein, last time, mostly we talked about the Islamicity index for our days. And you explained us in general how you evaluate this index for Muslim and non-Muslim countries. And surprisingly for me, but according to your numbers, many non-Muslim countries follow Islamic way of managing lifestyle or economy more than many Muslim countries. And by the way, I saw on your website you recently updated that report, so people can find it and get more information. Today, I would like to start with history. I would like to go back to the beginning, to 7th century, when Islam started its expansion. And before asking my questions, I would like to make one important note that we both are Muslims, but I'm recording this video not only for Muslims and not only for religious people. So that's why in our discussions, I try to use non-religious argumentation, maybe more academic. Although I'm not a social scientist, but I will try to use some argumentation that could be accepted regardless if you are Muslim or non-Muslim. So let's go back to 7th century. Simply, a group of Muslim Arabs, not a very large nation, starts expanding its religion, or if you're not a religious person, let's say ideology. And that time, much larger and stronger empires existed in this geography. However, Islam was expanded very quickly, relatively very quickly, to a very large area. Many nations accepted this religion and during a relatively short period of time. What do you think? Why this expansion was so successful? Some historians and social scientists explain this by the role of military strengths of Arabs. But I do not agree with this argument, because if that was just a military factor, then other empires, they had very strong armies, and if that was only a military factor, then after Arabs lost their military power, then people would leave Islam. But nations, they kept following Islamic rules. So in my understanding, again, in my very amateur understanding, so there had to be something more attractive in Islam. Again, I'm not talking about the faith. With all my respect, I don't think in very short time period, all those people from the bottom of their heart accepted Islam as as a religion. My understanding is that because this way, following the Islam made life better. Very simple explanation, my amateur explanation. What's your explanation? Why do you think Islam became attractive by for other people, for other nations?
Well, I think, thank you, by the way, first again, Arzu, for having me. As you know very well, I'm not a historian, so if I say some things that are wrong, I hope you and your friends will forgive me. But really, for me, Islam only existed for a very, very short time of what I consider the management of societies according to what is in the Quran, of course, which is open to interpretation, and what was said by the Prophet Muhammad. And I know this will get into some sectarian aspects, please forgive me, but in my view, while the Prophet was alive, he taught many, many useful things, and as you said, people saw the fruits of that. For instance, the Prophet believed in markets, which I think is a very important part of Islam. He, in fact, appointed a market administrator. He believed that markets should be regulated. For instance, when traders were coming into town, he did not allow people to go ahead and get some special information. So he did teach many, many things, and one can read about it, but which I think when you look at it in today's world, he had foresight. But as I said, I don't think really Islam existed very well in its pure form for very long, because as you are well aware, after the Prophet Muhammad's death, there were 4 people who were called the caliphs, and the Sunni Muslims called them the righteous ones. And 3 out of the 4 were murdered. So it shows that Islam struggled. It was not this hunky-dory, lovely, I love you, we get along. And of course, some people believe that the Prophet wanted his son-in-law, Ali ibn Abu Talib, to kind of lead the religion, and others said no, that was not his wish. And so anyway, so Islam had its growing pains, but as I said, I think that germ that the Prophet Muhammad sowed was a germ that, as you said, it was good management, rules, regulations, enforcement. I think he recognized human nature, that, if you leave mankind to their own devices, unfortunately, we are not pure, we act in our self-interest, and so on and so forth. And so I think number one, for me, the important thing was that beginning. that beginning, yes, there was battles. Even the Prophet Muhammad had to fight his enemies in Saudi Arabia, what is Saudi Arabia today, and so on. But there was that purity that he showed, and he had ardent followers. He really did. I mean, his closest associate, but also people followed him. And I think really from there, what you have, the message was spread, and there is no doubt that some of it was spread by the sword. Anyone who says no, that they came and they said hi, hi, and they just joined in, life doesn't work that way. But also, even though some of these caliphs, as I said, in my view, were corrupt. You know, I'm sorry to say it, but in my view, you can obviously tell which side I lean from. I think that when you look at the history of Islam, the one who was not always forceful, but to my way of thinking, would have been much better for Islam. Islam would have been very, very different, was his son-in-law, Ali. But this was spread a little bit by the sword. They clearly accumulated wealth doing that. And because the followers were so devoted, I think that spread. But also, there was one other very important thing. There was a compassionate aspect. Even by these, what I call corrupt caliphs who spread it, Islam was not harsh as is portrayed in the West. Namely, if you paid your taxes, which everyone, and you did what you're supposed to do, you were not forced to convert. You were not told, if you convert, and if you don't convert, we're going to behead you. You know, I think those are myths, in my opinion. You know, you can read about it. And so there was a compassionate aspect. So in that sense, Islam was somewhat different. It was spread with compassion, and it was the germ, that seed at the beginning was I believe, a pure seed. And I think that's what made Islam spread. And I agree with also what you said, that if you look at any country today, really countries that are successful have strong economies. You cannot be a successful country that educates, that innovates, that can defend itself, that can do any of those things unless it has a strong economy. So there was a stress in Islam, and this is something I'm sure we'll discuss, on what made a strong economy. What was this ideal Islamic economy? And so, because I think, again, that was realized. Now, of course, people, again, will come back and say, yes, the Prophet Muhammad was a trader himself, was a man who was in commerce. Yes, there's nothing wrong with that. But it was a system that realized that you had to have a strong economy for this group, this nascent group of people who call themselves Muslims, to be able to survive. If they didn't have a strong economy, they would not have survived. So I would say that, yes, it was the seed, it was the nurturing of a strong economy, and yes, they had military power, absolutely. Again, even today, let's be very frank about it, unless you have military power or you have somebody to defend you, we think we're civilized. But look what's going on around the world. It's military power that also dictates. So I think it was a combination of all of that. Now, if I may just add one other point when you talk about history, I think that for many, many years, decades, centuries, you know, people didn't talk about Islamic economics and Islamic finance. If you look at the kind of, when people started talking about Islamic economics, I would say it was in the last century, to try to formulate what is this Islamic economics. And I would say Islamic finance and what it means really didn't bubble up to the top until the late 60s, 1970s. There are reasons for that. And so the recognition of Islamic economics and finance is not a kind of thing that goes back for centuries that people really wrote about. There were texts here and there which dealt with it. As you also know that Muslims wrote a great deal about medicine and other innovation, mathematics and everything else. But in Islamic economics and finance, it was not really recognized as a separate field. And I think it's only more recent that people have seen it as something different than the Western view of finance, than the Western view of what is a good, solid economic system. Just one final comment. I'm sorry I talked too much, but one final comment. And I think that what is important, really for me, for my life, is I agree with you. I'm not here to convert anyone. I don't care if someone is a Muslim or is not a Muslim. I think what matters is that you're a decent human being and you care for this world. And I think many of the things that I see in Islam point in that direction. And broadly speaking, I would call the Islamic system, Islamic economic system, is a market-based system. Center of Islamic system is markets, well-functioning markets. Now, I don't like to use the word capitalism. People think that capitalism means markets. No, those are two different things. Now, the aspects of what Islam preaches about economics, that are also in the capitalist system. But if you look at what Islam preaches and what it teaches, it's more than just saying it's capitalism. It's much more than saying it's a market-based system. Because as we will see, hopefully, Islam has a lot of guardrails to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to prosper. Everyone has an opportunity to reach their goals. And sadly for me, and I have no problem saying this, and of course I make a lot of enemies by saying this, but when you look at Muslim countries, unfortunately, the ones that everybody talks about, the rich ones in the Persian Gulf and others, when they talk about them, Westerners think, that's what Islam is all about. It's about dictatorship. It's about lavish living. Look at how some of these guys in the Persian Gulf live, the rulers. Yachts that are from one end to the other, chairs that are embroidered with gold, while there are people who suffer. They think that's Islam. My purpose in life to say, I don't care if somebody is Muslim or not, but that has got nothing to do with Islam. These are just human beings that are greedy, rulers that are greedy, and they've given Islam a bad name. And that's why I think it's important for Westerners to understand, when they understand really what Islam is all about, I think you'll have better relation between Muslims and non-Muslims. And I also believe it's paramount importance that Muslims realize that too. Because I think what happened when I said that Islam was only really practiced briefly after the Prophet Muhammad's death, it was really, Islam was hijacked by these corrupt caliphs throughout its history. And what they did, they got these clerics to do their bidding, and the clerics. And even today, I promise you, go and visit some countries. If you go to a mullah, a cleric, and you want to have a discussion, they tell you, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. Just go pray and obey what we tell you. Namely, they have not allowed Islam to progress in a orderly fashion. They have not wanted people to question, to understand. It really treats people as if they have no brains. And so, but as I said, I'm sorry to give you such a long-winded answer to your, to your original point, but I think Islam started with a germ that was good, that was pure. It was hijacked, but yes, it did enough to gather those people. And I think that many of these countries, compared to the rule that they had, Islam was much more liberating. And so people were ready to dump their own rulers, whoever they were, and these other empires, whether it was Roman or whatever else, and to join the Muslim. That's why I think Islam spread so fast.
I thank you very much. My I wouldn't be honest if I say that I made a list of questions, just the discussions, and my questions basically I'm asking to understand the reasoning. So that's why. You mentioned about the current Muslim countries, and I totally agree with many of your comments, and some people may not like it, but we're talking about the realities. That even now, when I read some articles, books of economists, and it's now there are many interesting books, and then they analyze different countries, and they say, okay, these economies, these countries, they are successful, or they can be successful, and these model of economy is working better than another model of economy. And unfortunately, for me as a Muslim, many of them, they mention that, okay, these countries are not successful because Islamic economy cannot be reformed. So one is not able to reform Islamic economy and etc. But in my understanding, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was the biggest reformist of his time. And not only economy, in social life, he brought many reforms to his society, to his people. And I think last time we discussed that even just to imagine for us, for Muslim people and who was born in that geography, if one leaves his tribe or his relatives and move to other city and start friendship with others. I mean, even if now, if it happens, many people say that, oh, he betrayed his relatives, he's not good person, and etc. etc. But Prophet did that in 7th century. If you analyze it, it's a huge reform, and it's totally different view. What do you think? Why many economists, many scientists, they think Islamic economy cannot be reformed? Does it come from the I mean, does it represent the Islamic principles themselves, or just those people, they don't have a good understanding, real understanding of Islamic economy? I mean, what do you think, can economy of Muslim countries be modernized?
Well, I think you raised a very, very important point, but I think, if I may, before I try to answer your question, make a slightly different point on the side, is that there are academics, there are politicians, there are just ordinary people who want to just badmouth Islam. I will not mention names to you, but one very well-known academic said that the best way for, along the line of what you're saying, the best way for Muslims to succeed is to abandon their religion, become something else, which goes exactly to the point that you're raising. So I think there's an interested group trying to make Islam look evil. I'm sorry to use the word, but I think that's without a doubt. Now, I think that why, as you said, Islamic economies or Islamic countries, the whole political system, why they're hard to reform. I think it's just more than their economies. I hear many, many reasons. But it's got nothing to do with the religion. And I will tell you what those reasons are in a second. But my point of doing these Islamist indices was very simple, exactly goes to what you're saying. If you followed what this religion teaches, you would not land up with whatever country you want to badmouth. You would not land up with a Libya at this point, but you would land up with a New Zealand or a Canada. So it's absolutely erroneous. Now, and that's why I challenge people. I say, if you disagree with me, tell me which of these teachings are wrong that I have put in this index. And two, if you got better numbers, let's plug them in. And so really, for me, there's an interested group trying to badmouth this religion. Now, why is it hard to transform? I really believe, I think the facts to back me up, that throughout history, rulers, and it happened right away, but after the Prophet's death with the caliphs, rulers, were interested, like any human being, in power, money, that kind of stuff. And the clerics were hired to basically further that interest. And so there's some Muslim sects, some Muslim groups that believe that no matter what the ruler is, corrupt, whatever, you have to obey the ruler. Namely, I mean, that to me is almost becomes like, what shall I say, institutionalizing dictatorship. You're saying no matter what he does or she does, you got to do what you're told. Now, of course, I don't think that is anywhere in Islam, because if you go back again to the Prophet's teachings, he always, as you said, he was a reformist. He encouraged questions. He encouraged debate. He really felt that if you didn't, it was like a body without a head. I mean, while he realized it was important to pray, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's all you did, which is what they're taught in Muslim countries today, that you 5 times a day, you pray, you give money to alms when you have it, and you go to Mecca and you fast. And you get up in the morning and say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, that's then you're going to heaven. Now, that is not Islam. So I think that, number one, it was the people who taught what is Islam to Muslims, and Muslims have not taken the time to understand this. I mean, to me, again, God forgive me, there's no harm in memorizing every word in the Quran. But that is not a substitute for everything else that this religion asks. I mean, we glorify in this religion I don't, but people glorify a 6-year-old who can recite all of the Quran. Okay, but it's understanding it that matters. So I think that's number one. Number two, I think that don't belittle the role of the great powers in doing what they've done to Islam. Many of these countries, again, we don't want to get into too much politics, The rulers would not survive had it not been for the backing at some point of Great Britain, the United States, France to a lesser extent. But, you know, these are entities that back these people, supported them. And of course, they always say, oh, we want democracy and we want you to think, do this and that. But as I always, said to people, if I am a imperialist, it's much easier for me to deal with one man. I can easily corrupt him, make him do what I want, than if you have really a flourishing country with, I don't want to use the word democracy, but, with democratic values and so on and so forth. That's much more difficult. I mean, as I think important Westerners have said about democracy, it's messy, but it's the best system. So it is messy because people don't agree, you have to debate, you have to do this and that. It's much easier when there's a guy sitting up there and he has the whip and you do what you're told. So, and it's not in their interest. It's not in their interest to reform. Let me give you one important example, probably the most important example that I can give you. When you look around today at the world, at Muslim countries, which are the countries that you would call rich? I think, unless I'm mistaken, you would call rich the countries, just listening to the news, that have lots of oil and or gas, natural gas. Now, it's wonderful. And this, no one has ever, Arzu, debated me. When I wrote the first paper I ever wrote about Islamic economics was in 1973, I believe, about this. Nobody disagrees with this. That in Islam, it is clear that depletable resources, which means oil, which means gold, which means water under the ground, limited resources, belong to all the people. God put it there, and I, as one person, cannot say it's mine. And so the way that that oil or natural gas ought to be managed is in a way that gives the same benefit to everyone living in this generation and also preserving the right of future generations. I mean, that's just logical. Now, but if you are a mathematician, you're a learned man, much more than me, and if you look around and ask yourself, if I pose that question, if you're honest with me, what of these rich, in quotes, rich Muslim countries, do you know that they're managed in such a way that everyone gets the same benefit from these things? Nothing. And so, so when you said, why is it hard to reform? That's why it's hard to reform. In all those countries, they don't want to give that up. They don't want to give that up. They believe it's theirs. I think if you were to ask an average American, an average Canadian, why is, let's say, just, I'm sorry, it's the simplest example. Why is the ruler of Qatar so rich? Or why is the ruler of Saudi Arabia so rich? They say, oh, Qatar, all that natural gas. He has all that natural gas. Oh, the Saudis, oh, he's got all that oil. That's not their natural gas, his natural gas. It's not his oil, but it's managed in that way. And that is the thing that I hope Muslims around the world, you even sitting up north and me sitting here, we have a duty to say that this is not Islam. This is not Islamic economics. And this is wrong. And I think when people realize that, Muslims realize that, and also foreigners realize that, then maybe there's hope for change. I'm sorry to.
No, I totally agree, and indeed, when we look at our history, and interestingly, when I don't try to learn history from movies, but those movies, many of those movies, by the way, they are supported, sponsored by very rich people. And in those movies, they show the Prophet. They don't show the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but his companions, and I mean, they try to create his kind of the character that he was very, and his companion, they were very, you know, they never thought about being rich, and they weren't rich, and they, you know, gave away everything to poor people. And when you look at their lifestyle, they do exactly opposite. So it's kind of little even surprising me. Come on, don't you watch the movie that you made at least, and then look around your house, right? When you show that the Caliph he's sleeping on the ground, and then look at your, I'm very sorry to say that, but I know that even some sheikhs, when they travel to Europe or whatever, they carry many golden items with them. You know, everything has to be the golden. So it's really confusing, and to be honest, it's very, it makes me very sad. That's when I see that. Why? What's the reason of that? Is that then at the end, is that this cultural, it's based on our culture, or yeah, I agree. I see you disagree, and I'm just analyzing. I don't think this is cultural, because I see the same. Another example about non-Muslim nations like Korea, right? The same nation, the same culture, everything is the same, but economies, and in one they have a dictatorship, in another they have a maybe not the best democracy, but the democracy. So it looks like it's not something cultural or national. It's why do you think that is? Even the Muslim countries themselves, they also are different. In one country, very rich country, and they have a dictatorship. In another, yeah, some kind of democracy. In other countries, they don't have the oil, but they have they live better than. Like, again, I don't want to name any countries. I don't want to hurt anyone's feeling, but I know the Muslim countries without any oil, and they live better than the Muslim countries with oil. And you mentioned about the oil, and Canada also has the oil, but we don't have that much gap, you know, between rich and poor people. Yeah, of course, in all countries there is a gap, and why do you think it's happening? Again, I'm not sure if anyone knows the exact answer.
No. I think, you see, the questions that you raise are extremely important, and I think that's the nub of what you want to change. Let me tell you kind of what, number one, what economists say. And this is something that I totally agree with, that what a successful country does is not rocket science. They need good institutions, effective institutions. For instance, the rule of law. If you don't have the rule of law, you're kind of lost. Would you want to invest in a country that is a jungle, that is, I am above you in the legal system? So you got all these institutions that you need to have those to succeed. And this, by the way, in the West, goes back to what Adam Smith said. And this, ever since then, people have said, yes, institutions are the key for a successful country. Now, when you look at Muslim countries, they don't have effective institutions. You name me one Muslim country, I can only think of maybe one, possibly two, that has the rule of law and has other institutions with enforcement. For instance, it has good markets. I mean, I think another thing that's very important in Islam, by the way, we haven't gotten to those, that's maybe another time, but is the sanctity of personal property, which is also very, very important in the Western system, that, you know, contracts are enforced and are respected. So all of these institutions, and also another institution is actually customs, the customs that a country has. So all of these institutions are what makes a successful country. But you don't get good institutions overnight. It takes time. Now, of course, you should be laughing after that comment, say, "Oh boy, the Muslims have taken a long time. They haven't gotten there." Well, I don't think it's cultural. I don't think it's cultural at all. I think that the history of it is, as I said, people have hijacked this thing and they've used it for their own benefit, and they partnered with foreigners. I think the only successful Muslim country for me is probably Malaysia. Maybe I would also add to that country like Albania, I think has done well. Malaysia has about a little bit of oil. I mean, Albania, nothing, I don't believe. So it's those institutions have been really preempted in Muslim countries. And until you have effective institutions, I don't think things will change. And the only way you can do that is that I think Muslims need to be educated. They need to be responsible for their country. But they're not. I don't think that's cultural, but it's cultural in the sense that if you have lived with something for decades and decades and decades, it becomes ingrained. But it's not Islam. They have to break out of that. And unfortunately, whenever you see a Muslim country making a little bit of a change, then you say, there we have an opportunity. Well, then things go wrong. Like, I believe I was, you know, my Turkish students used to tell me that I was kind of cuckoo, because I really thought Turkey would be the country to show the way to the Muslim world. I think you need that. I think you need a successful case. I really believe that I was not a backer or a whatever, or in any way against, I was apolitical. But I really thought Iran had an opportunity to show Muslim countries the way. But I think it went down the tubes in many ways. I think the taking of hostages and so on and so forth, and really revenge and all of that, I think Iran went down the wrong path. I thought for a while Egypt, maybe, with the Arab uprising, they could do something. But again, foreigners, by the way, interfered there, and that died. So it's going to take time, Arzu. It's going to take time. It's going to, I really believe still, again, maybe I'm naive, but I really believe that if you have don't laugh at me, please, a selfless, charismatic Muslim who comes on the scene and manages selflessly to build these institutions in one country, I really think that could be the spark that will reinvigorate the Muslim world. Because right now, for me, I think the Muslim world, and I hope I don't offend you, is in decay. I mean, all the things that I see are decadent. I mean, one of the things that you touched on when you were talking about, somebody sleeping on the floor, and then that's what you see in the movies, but then look at how he lives. Well, I would say one of the important lessons of Islam is, in fact, you should have a modest lifestyle. This is Islam, modest lifestyle, and you should not hoard wealth. It should be shared. It is like a blood to keep the system going, wealth. But if you now were to go out in the street and say that, they would look at you and say, "What are you smoking? Where have you been?"
Yeah, go ahead, please.
When you look at it, how Prophet Muhammad arose from the deserts of Arabia among people who were uneducated and worshiping idols and everything else. He managed to change. Of course, we Muslims believe he had a revelation from God, but still, as an example, you would imagine that would be possible in a country for one person to rise, be dedicated, and to do that. And as I said, I really believe that Iran had an opportunity. I think Iran blew it. I think that, and of course, after Iran blew it, I think the West has really heaped a lot of problems on Iran to make sure that Iran stays like that. But as you said, a successful country. I mean, the number I always like to give is South Korea. Its economy in 1975 was half of Iran's. Today, South Korea's economy is larger than all of those countries combined in the Persian Gulf. It's doable. They're not perfect by no means, but they worked hard. They had reasonable institutions that nurtured that was in fact possible. They had corruption. They have problems, but it takes time. And I still believe it is possible, but I think it's up to Muslims. It really is up to Muslims to do something about it. And I just don't see it, though. I really don't see it.
Yeah, again, I would like to kind of make some, not conclusion, it's not something that I can, but still, I personally, I have a hope. My hope is, reason of my hope is a little bit different than yours. I mean, the subject of the hope. So you hope on a leader. To be honest, I don't. Of course, I wish. May God it happened. So, but I see leaders mostly. If something is a country's hope is based on a one leader, and that leader at the end makes things even worse. So I know more leaders who brought their countries down than up. Of course, it's some made that, but I hope, my hope is education. I think an educated person can find much more interesting things, in the life. And if you are educated, you will see much more interesting things around. You will see that it's having 100 different type of cars. There is nothing interesting in it. It's
Yes.
better if you read 10 books. Really, personally, I receive much more pleasure when I read something very interesting than you cannot drive those 100 cars the same time.
Same time.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know what people, how they get the pleasure from those type of things, or if you have 40 rooms in your house, so what? Or you have 2 rooms. I don't see that. What is the pleasure of that? I hope on education, and I hope that one day, it doesn't happen in one day, as you said, but I hope that we will stop saying, and our imams will stop saying that, don't ask the questions, just listen to me and do what I say. Unfortunately, it happens. That's from my own experience, that they say you shouldn't ask, and you shouldn't read anything else. You shouldn't read that book because that book was not written by a Muslim, or that book was written by bad Muslim. And it's kind of, I asked those imams, I say that, come on, if my faith can be destroyed just by reading a bad book, so it means that I don't have any faith. So I think we have to kind of educate ourselves. I want to start from myself. I'm talking about myself. It's just, I hope on that. And I see some trend, and I see many young Muslims that they try to educate themselves, and they have a little bit different views, to Islam and to other religions. And so I hope on that generation, and on generation who has the experience of working with those institutions that you mentioned. And I hope, if you agree, maybe we could continue again our discussions. Maybe we could talk about the institutions. It's really a problem, not only for Islam countries. I mean, it looks like many failing countries, the failure based on the lack of institutions.
Sure. I think that, before we conclude, let me just say that what you just said, I totally agree with you. I mean, you and I are 100% on the same page. And I've been criticized by my own friends also, that why do you always say we need one person to come? Why do Muslims always need a leader? Why can't they do it? What's wrong with them? Do they always have to worship one person? And it's not that. I just, it's that, when you look at the chemical reaction, you need something to spark it. And for me, I just think there's just so many things stacked in against that change coming. And I think one of the things that Muslims can do to be more exposed to what really this religion is all about. I mean, I haven't succeeded in any way, shape, or form, but that was my whole idea to do this Islamist indices, is to say, look, this is what this religion is all about. That, as you said, it's modest living, it's more equality. If you ask me what is at the heart of Islam, I would say justice. Now, you name me one Muslim country where you would say, this is a country that is just. Well, I would say, God, you're on some kind of drugs if you say that. You don't know what you're talking about. It just, and I always actually say to my, again, to my students, I used to say that a country's straitjacket is its people. That's what you're saying in different words, that we've got to change. But I'm saying, how do we change? And I think they've got to, as you say, they've got to be educated. They've got to learn what this is all about. And they've got to resist that imam, mullah, whatever you want to call him, who comes and says, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. Just read the Quran and go and do your prayers. But I think if that Muslim in that boat can go with some of these things. Hey, does Islam say that there should be no hoarding of wealth? Does Islam says that what's under the ground depletable belongs to all? Put them in the corner. And if you come with some authority, and again, you know, I'm a dreamer, that you say, oh, look, this stupid guy's got something called Islamist indices. Tell us what's wrong with him. What's wrong with this so we can learn from you, oh great Imam. You know, if people start doing that, maybe we'll have change. But otherwise, Arzu, you know, the cards, the deck is stacked. I mean, it's, you know, as you said, why would you want 200 cards? As, you know, I discussed this a lot with my own sister. I mean, if you had all the wealth in the world yesterday, but what matters is what there is today. What all of that accumulation of wealth means nothing. And you know, and you like me, we're going to die someday. What good is that wealth? And in the process, how many people have we made miserable? And I think that one of the things, for instance, that I think would be very interesting to discuss with you is what is Islamic finance all about? Because I think that's very important, what Islam says, and there's some interesting things about it.
Yeah, yeah. I think we both have the hope for good, and I have one non-Muslim friend. He's a very religious person. He's a Catholic, and we talk each other about the religions, and he tries to talk a little bit about the Catholicism, and I talk to him about Muslim. What I know, I don't know much, and he learned some words, and he said he liked the most in our words, inshallah. So may God it happen, right? So let's hope for good, and inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah. I mean, it's. I don't know. I mean, I get very, very upset when politicians call somebody an Islamist. That's already that he's a terrorist. Islamist is the same as terrorist. I mean, it's just, you know, and if you look at we Muslims, as you said, I think if we educate ourselves, then we will change. Absolutely. I think that then could be the most rapid thing, rapid change that we'll see if we are educated.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Inshallah.